The Desire for Change, Part 1. It is a truism that many who join a rising revolutionary movement are attracted by the prospect of sudden and spectacular change in their conditions of life. A revolutionary movement is a conspicuous instrument of change. Not so obvious is the fact that religious and nationalist movements, too, can be vehicles of change. Some kind of widespread enthusiasm or excitement is apparently needed for the realization of vast and rapid change, and it does not seem to matter whether the exhilaration is derived from an expectation of untold riches or is generated by an active mass movement. In this country, the spectacular changes since the Civil War were enacted in an atmosphere charged with the enthusiasm born of fabulous opportunities for self-advancement. Where self-advancement cannot or is not allowed to serve as a driving force, other sources of enthusiasm have to be found if momentous changes, such as the awakening and the renovation of a stagnant society or radical reforms in the character and pattern of life of a community, are to be realized and perpetrated. Religious, revolutionary, and nationalist movements are such generating plants of general enthusiasm. In the past, religious movements were the conspicuous vehicles of change. The conservatism of a religion, its orthodoxy, is the inherent coagulum of a once highly reactive sap. A rising religious movement is all the change and experiment open to new views and techniques from all quarters. Islam, when it emerged, was an organizing and modernizing medium. Christianity was a civilizing and modernizing influence among the savage tribes of Europe. The Crusades and the Reformation both were crucial factors in shaking the Western world from the stagnation of the Middle Ages. In modern times, the mass movements involve the realization of vast and rapid change, are revolutionary and nationalist, singly or in combination. Peter the Great was probably the equal, in dedication, power, and ruthlessness, of many of the most successful revolutionary or nationalist leaders, yet he failed in his chief purpose, which was to turn Russia into a Western nation. And the reason he failed was that he did not infuse the Russian masses with some soul-stirring enthusiasm. He either did not think it necessary or did not know how to make of his purpose a holy cause. It is not strange that the Bolshevik revolutionaries who wiped out the last of the Tsars and Romanovs should have a sense of kinship with Peter, a Tsar and a Romanov, for his purpose is now theirs, and they hope to succeed where he failed. The Bolshevik Revolution may figure in history as much an attempt to modernize a sixth of the world's surface as an attempt to build a communist economy. The fact that both the French and the Russian revolutions turned into nationalist movements seems to indicate that in modern times nationalism is the most copious and durable source of mass enthusiasm, and that nationalist fervor must be tapped in the drastic changes projected and initiated by revolutionary enthusiasm are to be consummated. One wonders whether the difficulties encountered by the present Labour government in Britain are not partly due to the fact that the attempt to change the economy of the country and the way of life of 49 million people has been initiated in an atmosphere singularly free from fervor, exultation, and wild hope. The revulsion from the ugly patterns developed by most contemporary mass movements has kept the civilized and decent leaders of the Labour Party shy of revolutionary enthusiasm. The possibility still remains that events might force them to make use of some mild form of chauvinism, so that in Britain, too, the socialization of the nation might have as its natural corollary the nationalization of socialism. The phenomenal modernization of Japan would probably not have been possible without the revivalist spirit of the Japanese nationalism. It is perhaps also true that the rapid modernization of some European countries, Germany in particular, was facilitated to some extent by the upsurge and thorough diffusion of nationalist fervor. Judged by present indications, the renaissance of Asia will be brought about through the instrumentality of nationalist movements rather than by other mediums. It was the rise of a genuine nationalist movement which enabled Kemal Atatürk to modernize Turkey almost overnight. In Egypt, untouched by a mass movement, modernization is slow and faltering. Through its rulers from the day of Muhammad Ali have welcomed Western ideas, and its contracts with the West have been many and intimate. Zionism is an instrument for the renovation of a backward country and the transformation of shopkeepers and brain workers into farmers, laborers, and soldiers. Had Chiang Kai-shek known how to set in motion a genuine mass movement, or at least sustain the nationalist enthusiasm kindled by the Japanese innovation, he might have been acting now as the renovator of China. Since he did not know how, he was easily shoved aside by the masters of the art of religification, the art of turning practical purpose into holy causes. It is not difficult to see why America and Britain, or any Western democracy, could not play a direct and leading role in rousing the Asiatic countries from their backwardness and stagnation. The democracies are neither inclined nor perhaps able to kindle a revivalist spirit in Asia's millions. The contribution of the Western democracies to the awakening of the East has been indirect and certainly unintended. They have kindled an enthusiasm of resentment against the West, and it is this anti-Western fervor which is at present rousing the Orient from its stagnation of centuries. Though the desire for change is not infrequently a superficial motive, it is yet worth finding out whether a probing of this desire might not shed some light on the inner workings of mass movements. We shall inquire therefore into the nature of the desire for change. There is in us a tendency to locate the shaping force of our existence outside ourselves. Success and failure are unavoidably related in our minds with the state of things around us. Hence it is that people with a sense of fulfillment think it is a good world, and would like to conserve it as it is, while the frustrated favor radical change. The tendency to look for all causes outside ourselves persists even when it is clear that our state of being is the product of personal qualities such as ability, character, appearance, health, and so on. If anything ail a man, says Thoreau, Thoreau, so that he does not perform his functions, if he have a pain in his bowels even, he forthwith sets about reforming the world. It is understandable that those who fail should incline to blame the world for their failure. The remarkable thing is that the successful too, however much they pride themselves on their foresight, fortitude, thrift, and other sterling qualities, are at bottom convinced that their success is the result of fortuitous combination of circumstances, as opposed to hard work, I guess. The self-confidence of even the constantly successful is never absolute. They are never sure that they know all the ingredients which go into the making of their success. The outside world seems to them a precariously balanced mechanism, and so long as it ticks in their favor, they are afraid to tinker with it. Thus the resistance to change and the ardent desire for it spring from the same conviction, and the one can be as vehement as the other. Discontent by itself does not invariably create a desire for change. Other factors have to be present before discontent turns into dissatisfaction or disaffection. One of these is a sense of power. Those who are awed by their surroundings do not think of change, no matter how miserable their condition. When our mode of life is so precious as to make it patent that we cannot control the circumstances of our existence, we tend to stick to the proven and the familiar. We counteract a deep feeling of insecurity by making our existence a fixed routine. We hereby acquire the illusion that we have tamed the unpredictable. Fisher folk, nomads, and farmers who have to contend with the willful elements, the creative worker who depends on inspiration, the savage awed by his surroundings, they all fear change. They face the world as they would on an all-powerful jury. The abjectly poor, too, stand in awe of the world around them, and are not hospitable to change. It is a dangerous life we live when hunger and cold are at our heels. There is thus a conservatism of the destitute as profound as the conservatism of the privileged, and the former is as much a factor in the perpetuation of social order as the later. The men who rush into undertakings of vast change usually feel they are in possession of some irresistible power. The generation that made the French Revolution had an extravagant conception of the omnipotence of the man's reason and the boundless range of his intelligence. Never, says de Tocqueville, had humanity been prouder of itself, nor had it ever so much faith in its own omnipotence. And joined with this exaggerated self-confidence was a universal thirst for change which came unbidden to every mind. Lenin and the Bolsheviks, who plunged recklessly into the chaos of the creation of a new world, had blind faith in the omnipotence of Marxist doctrine. The Nazis had nothing as potent as that doctrine, but they had faith in an infallible leader, and also faith in a new technique. For it is doubtful whether National Socialism would have made such rapid progress if it had not been for the electrifying conviction that the new techniques of blitzkrieg and propaganda made Germany irresistible. Even the sober desire for progress is sustained by faith in the intrinsic goodness of human nature and in the omnipotence of science. It is a defiant and blasphemous faith, not unlike that held by the men who set out to build a city in a tower whose top may reach unto heaven, and who believe that nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Offhand, one would expect that the mere possession of power would automatically result in a cocky attitude toward the world and a receptivity to change. But it is not always so. The powerful can be as timid as the weak. What seems to count more than possession of instruments of power is faith in the future. Where power is not joined with faith in the future, it is used mainly to ward off the new and pervasive of the status quo. On the other hand, extravagant hope, even when not backed by actual power, is likely to generate a most reckless daring, while the hopeful can draw strength from the most ridiculous source of power, a slogan, a word, a button. No faith is potent unless it is also faith in the future, unless it has a millennial component. So to an effective doctrine, as well as being a source of power, it must also claim to be a key to the book of the future. Those who would transform a nation or world cannot do so by breeding and captaining discontent, or by demonstrating the reasonableness and desirability of the intended changes, or by coercing people into a new way of life. They must know how to kindle and fan an extravagant hope. It matters not whether it be hope of a heavenly kingdom, of heaven on earth, of plunder of untold riches, of fabulous achievement, or world domination. If the communist wins Europe and a large part of the world, it will not be because they know how to stir up discontent or how to infect people with hatred, but because they know how to preach hope. Thus, the difference between the conservative and the radical seems to spring mainly from their attitude toward the future. Fear of the future causes us to lean against and cling to the present, while faith in the future renders us receptive to change. Both the rich and poor, the strong and weak, they who have achieved much or little can be afraid of the future. When the present seems so perfect that the most we can expect is its even continuation in the future, change can only mean deterioration. Hence, men of outstanding achievement and those who live full, happy lives usually set their faces against drastic innovation. The conservatism of invalids and people past middle age stems too from fear of the future. They are on the lookout for signs of decay and feel that any change is more likely to be for the worse than for the better. The abjectly poor also are without faith in the future. The future seems to them a booby-trap buried in the road ahead. One must step gingerly. To change things is to ask for trouble. As for the hopeful, it does not seem to make any difference who it is that is seized with a wild hope, whether it be an enthusiastic intellectual, a land-hungry farmer, a get-rich-quick speculator, a sober merchant or industrialist, a plain working man or noble lord. They all proceed recklessly with the present, wreck it if necessary, and create a new world. There can thus be revolutions by the privileged as well as by the underprivileged. The movements of enclosure in 16th and 17th century England was a revolution by the rich. The woolen industry rose to high prosperity, and grazing became more profitable than cropping. Landowners drove off their tenants and closed the commons and wrought profound changes in the social and economic texture of the country. The lords and nobles were upsetting the social order, breaking down the ancient law and customs, sometimes by means of violence, often by pressure and intimidation. Another English revolution by the rich occurred at the end of the 18th and beginning of the 19th century. It was the Industrial Revolution. The breathtaking potentialities of mechanization in the minds of manufacturers and the merchants on fire set the minds of the merchants on fire. They began a revolution as extreme and radical as ever, and inflamed the minds of secretarians. And in a relatively short time, these respectable, God-fearing citizens changed the face of England beyond recognition. When hopes and dreams are loose in the streets, it is well for the timid to lock doors, shutter windows, and lie low until the wrath has passed, where there is often a monstrous incongruity between the hopes, however noble and tender, and the action which follows them. It is as if ived maidens and garlanded youths to herald the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. For men to plunge headlong into an undertaking of vast change, they must be intensely discontented, yet not destitute, and they must have the feeling that by possession of some potent doctrine, infallible leader, or some new technique, they have access to a source of irresistible power. They must have an extravagant conception of the prospects and the potentialities of the future. Finally, they must be wholly ignorant of the difficulties involved in their vast undertaking. Experience is a handicap. The men who started the French Revolution were wholly without political experience. The same is true of the Bolsheviks, Nazis, and the revolutionaries in Asia. The experienced man of affairs is a latecomer. He enters the movement when it is already a going concern. It is perhaps the Englishman's political experience that keeps him shy of mass movements. 2. The desire for substitutes. There is a fundamental difference between the appeal of a mass movement and the appeal of a practical organization. The practical organization offers opportunities for self-advancement, and its appeal is mainly to self-interest. On the other hand, a mass movement, particularly in its active revivalist phase, appeals not to those intent on bolstering and advancing a cherished self, but to those who crave to be rid of an unwanted self. A mass movement attracts and holds a following not because it can satisfy the desire for self-advancement,